and welcome back to the Analyst of Vajiram and Ravi, where we bring to you detailed discussion of important articles from both the Hindu and Indian Express. Today is 16th of December, and here are the following articles presented before you. So in the first article, we will talk about a very important topic, that is urban floods, and this is very important from UPSC point of view because it deals with two parts of the syllabus, GS1, where we read about geophysical phenomena, and GS3, where we have to read about disaster management. Then the second one is the Hydrographic survey pact between Maldives and India, and in a blow to the bilateral relations, Maldives have called out that we are not going to continue or renew this hydrological pact with India. So what are the context and what are the consequences? We are going to have a look in that. Then we will read about a climate concern. This is Arctic amplification, which suggests that the warming taking place at Arctic region is 4 times faster as compared to warming of the average Earth. Then from prelims point of view, we will read about a multilateral group called G7 Bloc, and finally we will analyze the trade trends in India, which has also suggested the squeezing up of fiscal deficit in India. So let's get started. So our first topic is about urban floods. This is seen in the context that Chennai in this year 2023 has seen the worst flood in 47 years, and an editorial coverage has been covered on the Hindu newspaper upon the same. So we will analyze about urban floods and what are its causes and consequences and way forward, especially in Indian context. Now, as I've already told you, it deals with two parts of syllabus, and UPSC is getting into a habit of asking questions from those areas which have overlapping effect on multiple parts of the syllabus. So therefore, this topic is very important, and not only that, UPSC has already asked a question in 2020 regarding urban floods. So let's discuss about urban floods in detail. Now, as you know, that rising amount of heavy rains or rising frequency of heavy rains is seen in India and across the world, and this is a very common news. Now, one of the most common effects of these rising heavy rainfall is the rising amount of inundation, which also impacts the lives and livelihood and the property, and therefore this inundation is known as floods. So while we cannot really ignore the impact, or we cannot really control the amount of heavy rainfall that is coming, the fact that the floods are getting converted into disaster is the point of concern over here, and this is more so concernful when it comes to the urban areas. The urban areas and the urban cities especially see a dichotomous situation in the form that on one hand they are seeing flooded areas, swamp areas, and on the other hand they are seeing deserts. They are seeing deserts because of drying water bodies leading to water insecurity, water crisis in these cities. Now these two dichotomies are existing together, and therefore we need to understand what are urban floods in detail and how can it also become a measure for better water management in urban cities. Now, what are urban floods? Urban floods are inundation of land or property in a built-in environment which is developed, environment which is concretized, or which is performing a lot of accelerated infrastructural projects. So this is where, if in a built-in environment you have a flooding that is caused due to heavy rainfall, cyclones, etc., then that is known as a flood. This is particularly defined by the National Disaster Management Authority, which also, by the way, provides a distinguishing factor between the rural flood and the urban flood, because we know that the most problematic among both of them is the urban flood. Why so? Because rural floods are taking place due to heavy precipitation, but when it comes to urban flood, it has growing consequences, or it takes place not just because of heavy precipitation, but also because of rapid acceleration of the urbanization. Because of more people coming into urban areas, more spaces now getting converted into urban area, which is constricted in space and it is densely populated. So therefore, a larger exposure of the flood impact can be seen. Then it is also characterized, urban floods are also characterized by heavy development and heavy encroachments, which also limits the storage and the absorption capacity and also alters the drainage pattern of the area. Now, because of these reasons, urban floods have become more problematic. Urban floods are not an uncommon phenomena. They have been there since time immemorial, since the cities got developed, but this time the intensity and frequencies are also getting upsurged, and therefore increase in the flood peak. So for example, if you give a particular amount of drainage or water to both urban areas and rural areas, you will observe that the flood will peak up to 1.8 to 8 times in an urban area as compared to the rural area. And not only that, the volumes of the flooding will also be up to 6 times in an urban area. So therefore, it is more disastrous when it comes to flooding in urban area as compared to a rural area. And that is why we are reading about the urban areas. Now, the urban floods, as you can see, can also be observed. The rise in their intensity and frequency can also be observed from the following map. You can see that almost all the cities of India, almost all the capital cities, almost all the million plus cities that are having population of more than 10 lakh, all of them have been flooded in the past 1 decade. In fact, multiple times. More so, cities like Chennai, cities like Delhi and Mumbai, they're very infamous for the very disastrous flooding that happens over there. You can take this map as a very resourceful suggestive for you, which you can as it is copy in your mains answers and see the leverage of marks you will get, because this is a very important map. Now, once we have understood the different types of urban floods and the different areas which are succumbed under urban floods, what are urban floods, what are its characteristics, now you also try to answer this particular question. And I would recommend you to first watch this discussion and then try to write it yourself. Now see, what are the causes of urban floods? That is the second point of discussion. The rise in causes are both the natural factors and the anthropogenic factors. So there are natural factors which involves the kind of topography of the region, the meteorological factors, the drainage system, the drainage pattern, and also some of the climatological systems. For example, climate change at global level and some of the microclimate that is developed in local levels. So while there are some natural causes, but they are not the ones who have to bear all the burden of urban flood, because it is the unsustainable development and the accelerated urbanization, which is one of the anthropogenic reasons that is leading to aggravation or escalation of the disaster that is getting generated from urban flood. So here we are going to analyze meteorological, hydrological, anthropogenic causes. Your meteorological causes include the climatological ones, which means first of all the climate change. Climate change is the first and foremost culprit, because of which the melting of glacier is taking place. Melting of glacier is leading to inundation of the coastal areas and the coastal islands, which is eventually leading to flooding of the urban areas, especially the coastal cities like Mumbai, Chennai, etc. Then we have also got more frequently developed low pressure in our oceans, which has led to intensification of cyclones. And cyclones also lead to inundation or flooding in the coastal areas. So these are two impacts. First of all, the cyclones, and then we have got melting of ice, which are the main culprits of that are created from climate change that leads to flooding, especially in the urban areas. And then there are some local factors also. Local factors, for example, creation of urban heat islands. Now, as you know, that due to heavy concretization and development, the average temperature inside a typical urban area is up to 5 to 8 degrees centigrade higher as compared to that of the outer area. Now, any water body which is inside it will generally get more easily evaporated, and therefore the precipitation will be highly likely in an urban dome, in a heat island dome. So these are the microclimates that are created, the micro warming that is created, which eventually leads to high degree of precipitation. This also causes flood on a micro level. Then the hydrological problems, because the rivers are not supporting each other most of the times. Either rivers are running out of water or either they are unsynchronized. The slopes are not overlapping. So therefore, if for example a tributary was supposed to join it in this manner because of the sudden slope, if the slope got encroached because of development, this water will not be able to flow. And therefore, the encroachment on the slope will also lead to discordant pattern, discordant runoff. The water will start spilling all over. And as we know, that spillage of water leads to flooding. So therefore, unsynchronized runoff and also sometimes presence of high tides are some of the hydrological reasons. Now let's talk about the real culprit here. That is the anthropogenic reasons. So anthropogenic reasons are, first of all, the inadequate infrastructure. The drainage systems that we have, the canals, the dams, etc. that we have right now are centuries old. They need maintenance. They are not properly maintained, not properly desilted as well. They are old, they are discordant. For example, you can see while approaching the Botanical Garden of New Delhi, whenever flood comes, whenever the rainfall comes up, that area particularly gets gets overwhelmed by a lot of water. Why? Because there is no slope area. It is manufactured, it is infrastructured in such a way. So next is the dysfunctional infrastructure. Dysfunctional infrastructure, which for example some of the dams are there, but they only have got a limited storage capacity of less than 20%. All the other water is eventually spilling off. Why? Because of low maintenance. Next is there is high siltation. So in the case of Chennai particularly, it is a very unique city which actually has got more than 3 river systems, drainage system. Now these river systems would have been very effective in draining out the water in the Bay of Bengal. But then what happens? Because of the poor maintenance of the dams that come in between these rivers, and because of the low maintenance of the banks and heavy encroachment on their bank, loss of riparian states, loss of the areas which had wetlands, therefore these Chennai rivers have also become ineffective in releasing out the excess water. And as a result of heavy siltation of the dams and canals, for example, the Buckingham Canal, etc., it has led to overflow of the water out of it. So this is one among the anthropogenic factor only. Next is the heavy level of concretization. Concrete is not permeable as compared to land, as compared to your soil. So therefore, heavy concretization affects the amount of permeability of water inside, so as it can recharge the aquifers under the ground. So that is another reason. Then there is loss of wetland. Wetlands acts as riparian buffer because they are the very good sponge or absorbers of the excess water recharge, and then they recharge the aquifers. But because we are losing the wetlands now, because we want to grow urbanization, development, encroachment, etc., laying up of infrastructure and buildings, therefore we can see that loss of wetlands, concretization are one among the reasons which are also creating or accelerating urban floods. Then there is also improper waste management. Putting and throwing all our waste into the river is not the solution. In fact, it worsens up the problem because it creates sludges. It creates sludges in the river, making the water not only unfit for drinking, but also overwhelms it, so that when the excess water from the rain comes, it is not able to contain it inside this particular water body, for example, a lake or a wetland. Therefore, waste management or the lack of waste management is also one of the reasons why the water bodies are overwhelmed. So by now, you must have understood one thing. There are two reasons which causes flood. One, because the water body that you have is not able to seep in inside, or the areas that you have, the riparian buffers for example, they are not able to absorb the water. Second, because the water body is so much silted that it is not able to contain or store the excess water, and therefore there is excess runoff out of the water body, which is worsening the situation. These are the broad reasons which, because of multiple causes, gives aggravation to the urban floods. One more, a very brilliant case study of this is showcased in the form of Delhi. So what happened? Back in 1997, Delhi used to have about 1000 water bodies, but now it got reduced to 700 because of lack of maintenance, encroachment, development, etc. We can say now that from the past 15 years, we can see that 4 major flooding events have happened in Delhi, the frequency of which was not very high before that, but now because of lack of management, lack of city planning, over encroachment, for example, you can see in the Vajiram region, the buildings are cluttered up with each other, the slopes are discordant, and therefore heavy flood or heavy collection of water takes place over there. All of this is because the lack of management and also lack of regards of the natural buffers or natural sponges. Fine. Now, how can we make our cities flood resilient? First and foremost, we need to follow a water management based planning model, which means that the water planning or the water resources planning shouldn't be done at a municipality level or at a municipal jurisdictional level. It should be enhanced. It should be enhanced more to the landscape approach, so that an entire watershed is covered. So watershed management type of planning is the need of the hour. Second, we also need to provide proper planning. Proper planning, for example, the slopes need to be taken care of, the study of geography, the study of topography should be there, study of hydrology, meteorology should be done beforehand, some early warning system should be created, satellite imagery can also be taken help of, and by that, proper urban planning should be created before creating any water structure or any water resource. So therefore, proper planning and proper designing is required. Second is creating spawn cities, and the best case study of it would be the cities of China. So spawn cities are those where the cities act as the natural absorber or sponges of the excess water. So here you do not need to construct a reservoir as such, but by the very virtue of having a sponge-like creation, which means creating a kind of land which is deconcretized in nature, which eventually leads to or filters the excess water to or inside the soil, that is underground water. That is how we create the sponge cities. Sponge cities actually cater to two demands. First of all, to deal with the urban floods havoc, and second, to recharge the groundwater level. So this is about sponge city. Then second, to give regards to the green infrastructure, for example wetland, and the blue infrastructure, for example constructing traditional water bodies or tanks, for example the Johar system, for example the Ahar Pine system of Bihar, etc. Then development and maintenance is very, very important, because as we know, due to rising siltation, due to rising sludging, due to rising accumulation of developmental materials and the waste material, we can see that many of the cities, for example Chennai, who had good prospect of draining off their excess water, they were also suffering. So in order to save them, a good case study from Bangalore can be considered, where in this particular lake, desilting and removal of excess vegetation effort was taken up by the government, and therefore it has led to increase in its depth, thereby also increasing its storage capacity by 54%, and thereby combating the sewage inflow, ensuring that the water holding capacity of the reservoirs are enhanced. Next is the waste management. The best example would be taken from Mangalore city again. Mangalore City Corporation actually initiated a sewage treatment plant. So because whatever waste that is coming in the drainage system is treated beforehand before it enters the water body. So this was also, waste management is also one among the resilient steps that we can take in this regard. Next is disaster management. So these were the pre-disaster efforts at the stage of design, planning and management. But what if the disaster has struck? Then you need to have early warning systems that have been specially adopted in coastal cities of Mumbai and Chennai. So Mumbai has got I-flows of Mumbai, and similarly there is I-flows in Chennai. Both of them are very efficient early warning systems. Then we need to create a master plans with regards to disaster management for all these cities, especially those which are prone to urban floods. And now as we can see that almost most of these cities, million plus cities, are affected by the urban floods. Almost all the cities should have a master plan as to how to deal with urban floods. So this disaster should be given due regards. Then there should be coordination among several agencies as well, because this particular the governance of water in India is very digress. It is very diverted. A particular authority is managing groundwater, a particular authority is managing the river water, etc. We need to have a convergence between them. We need to bring them together, and therefore coordination is a must in order to have effective disaster management and effective urban planning across the city. And end of the day, you have learned that we need to go for a watershed based management approach. So now I hope you will be able to solve this particular question. Also make sure that you are mindful of the fact that they are talking about million cities. So do not forget to define million cities, and then give remedial measures by also suggesting the disastrous havocs that happen in Hyderabad and Pune. Now coming to the next topic, this is about Hydrographic Survey Pact. So what has happened, that Maldives government the new government that has formed in Maldives has already highlighted the flagged the fact that Indian government has deployed too many military troops in the island of Maldives, and they want Indian government to take it back. Now, in retaliation to which, or in response to which, Maldives government has also decided not to renew the agreement with India, which allowed the India to perform what? The hydrographic surveys in the Maldivian water. So what are these hydrographic surveys? What is the need of conducting this survey, and how was it going to help both India and Maldives? And what is the context behind this decision of Maldivian government? We are going to read this over here. So first of all, what is a hydrographic survey? As the name suggests, this is something related to studying the waters or the features of the water. Now this is very important for the growing economy. This is very important for the interconnected world, where we have to cross across each other's water, and we have to travel for trade, for security purposes, for economic purposes, etc. So therefore, in order to take care of that, surveys have to be managed. Now these surveys are scientific measurements and descriptions of the features which affect the maritime navigation, maritime construction, activities like dredging, activities like exploiting wind farms, activities like exploiting renewable energies like OTEC and wind energy from wind farms, having offshore oil exploration, which is very, very important, especially in Indian Ocean, and then drilling and related activities. Now, US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has also suggested that these surveys are very, very important because they help you to, first of all, map out the water depth that you are going to explore. Second, the shape of the seafloor and the coastline, so you will be able to navigate through it easily, especially the submarines. Then the location of the possible obstructions, if any, all of this, a map will be created with the help of this hydrogeographic survey. Then physical features of water bodies are also made sure that they are mapped on a particular standard or on a paper in a digital format as well. So the idea over here is to equip ourselves with the navigational capacity to navigate about any water. But what happens? There are certain challenges. There are certain challenges as to why not every country can create a hydrographic survey on its own. Because of the limited technology, because of the limited knowledge, because of limited hydrographic capacity. It has also been highlighted by United Nations that approximately 50% of the coastal states across the world have not got any hydrographic capability. And the rest 20% of them, though they have also got limited ones. So therefore, the need of the hour is international cooperation. For example, I have got that much amount of water and resources and potential, but I do not have that kind of talent in me, so that I'll be able to create the survey myself. So I'll be having an agreement with some other country which is more developed, for example India, and I'll ask India to have a hydrographic survey in my waters, which will eventually benefit my own nation, my own security and economy, as well as India's. So only 25%, including India, have adequate hydrographic capabilities. Therefore, this pact was struck between Maldives, which is a smaller economy as compared to India, and the other country. Then, therefore, hence, is immense scope of international cooperation in hydrography. We have already read this. And this is particularly true. This lack of capability and lack of cooperation is more evident in nations of Southeast Asia and Africa, where only 36% of Asian waters have been surveyed systematically and 64% waters of Africa have been surveyed systematically. More so important because they are the cradle of civilization. They hold so many resources in them that we need to effectively first survey them in order to navigate and exploit the resources for the benefit of mankind. This is basically the significance of the hydrological pact and the survey. Now, what about the India-Maldives Pact? So, Narendra Modi and the then Prime Minister Soli, they signed a pact in 2019 to support Maldives, and India actually took up its policy of supporting Maldives to set up hydrographic facilities for their navy or for their defense personnel, which is MNDF, the Defense Forces of Maldives. So, till now, 3 joint hydrographic surveys have been undertaken. The first was done in 2021 by the first ever hydrographic equipment or INS carrier, that is Darshak. Please remember this name. Then 2022 and finally in 2023, and now this pact has been cancelled or aborted. Now, India also aims to provide training, enhancing the capabilities of the Maldives or the other nations with which it has hydrographic pact by training them in the Hydrographic Institute of Goa. So, where is the Hydrographic Institute of Goa located? It is of Institute of India located. This is Goa. And where is the headquarter of INCOIS located? Kindly let me know that also. So, this is a question for you. Now, why does Maldives want to end this pact? First of all, because of the change of government. The previous government was pro-Indian, but this government is pro-Chinese. This government, which is now led by Muizu. This person who is from the Progressive Party and the erstwhile president was from Democratic Party. So because of the change in regime, the change in approach has also taken place, and they have already highlighted the India Out campaign, where they have said that any commitment which is there in Maldives with some other country where it is not really benefiting the Maldives, rather it is benefiting more the other country, Maldives will be sanctioning it out or it will be aborting it. So an India Out campaign was also carried out because Maldives alleged that India has got large military contingent to the Maldives. Now, The next point in discussion should be the India-Maldives relationship assessment, and that will be taken up in the upcoming Analyst. So wait for that as well. Now before winding up, let's also quickly finish the mapping of Maldives. So Maldives, as you can see, is located just below the Mahe of Lakshadweep. In fact, the Mahe or Maldives are separated by 8-degree north latitude. This question can be asked, so this is important. Alongside, we also need to understand the order of arrangement of multiple Indian Ocean islands. So first of all, we have got Maldives. Then below that, we have got Diego Garcia, which is actually a United States naval base. Then we have got Seychelles in the west. Then we have got Madagascar and Comoros in further west side, and finally in the most southern part we have got Mauritius. So kindly remember the order, because this can also be asked in the examination, and it is also important from mains point of view in order to put a good framing. Our next article is about Arctic amplification. So recently, the Arctic report card, which has been published on an annual basis by National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of USA, has recorded or has highlighted that the 2023 summer was indeed the warmest summer ever witnessed by the Arctic region. This is more concerning because Arctic amplification is also going on. So what is Arctic amplification? Let's first understand that. So any weather phenomena or any change in the weather pattern can have more serious impacts on the polar regions of the world as compared to the tropical regions because of the more stable environment over there. Now, because of the more stable environment, whatever change happens across the globe will be impacting Arctic and Antarctica region the most. Now, among both of them also, Arctic region is the one which is going to be more heavily impacted as compared to Antarctica. Why? Because the atmospheric stability is more in a continental shelf of Antarctica, because as you know, it is continental type as compared to oceanic type. Arctic region, as you can see, is basically a frozen ocean only. It doesn't have that much land mass. So therefore, it is very sensitive to any kind of change. Therefore, we were seeing that while the ozone hole was forming in Antarctica region because of the prevalence of stable climatic conditions. But in the case of Arctic region, we see amplifying effect of climate change. Because any change that occurs over here, it gets amplified, which occurs across the earth, gets amplified in the polar region, specifically in the Arctic region. So when changes to the earth atmosphere, for example, rise in the amount of greenhouse gases, eventually leading to rise in global warming, when it leads to a larger difference in the temperature near the south and north pole than to the rest of the world, then it is known as Arctic, or it is known as the amplification or polar amplification. As we know that it is more pronounced in the northern latitude in the Arctic region, therefore we call it as a term we call it the Arctic amplification. Now, Arctic amplification is also where we can say that at least 4 times warming takes place in the Arctic region. The rate of 4 times takes place in Arctic region as compared to the warming that is happening, or average warming that is happening across the globe. This is why we use the term amplification. It is also suggested that some other states like the Norway and some parts of Canada, they are seeing warming at a rate of up to 7x or 7 times more as that compared to the average global warming. Then 2023 summer, as highlighted by this report, was the warmest on record ever seen by Arctic. And it is the 14th consecutive year in which the Arctic temperature have exceeded the previous average, the average of previous decade, that is 1991 to 2020. So these are some of the factors, or these are some of the pointers you can utilize in your mains answer writing as well. Now, what are the causes of Arctic amplification? Why is this polar region more susceptible to warming or amplification as compared to any other part of the world? First and foremost, because of the prevalence of ice. Ice, as you know, has got excellent reflective properties. So because I have ice, it acts as a mirror against any kind of incoming radiation. This is known as, this property to reflect back the radiation is known as albedo. Ice has got high albedo. What happens when this ice or the sensitive area, it starts getting heated up? The ice will start melting, it will start thawing, And as a result of this, we will see that the albedo will go down, and therefore the reflective power will go down, the radiation will start getting absorbed. And as you know that ice is very sensitive to any amount of heat. The more amount of heat you absorb because of the lessening of the albedo, the more further positive feedback will be created. Now what is positive feedback? We will be reading. But before that, let's also understand one more factor, that there is a decrease in the lapse rate as well. So what happens, Arctic regions or the polar regions specifically, they are highlighted by a positive lapse rate. So generally what happens, that in a normal lapse rate, the amount of, as you move above the elevation, the temperature will drop. But when it comes to polar region, the lower regions have got, or regions which are closer to the land, they have got lesser temperature as compared to the atmospheric region. So here the lapse rate is actually positive, which means with height it is, the temperature is increasing. Now because a particular temperature has been maintained as a positive lapse rate, any disturbance in this lapse rate will also impact the amount of warming. So this also produces a positive feedback mechanism. Positive feedback. So what happens in particular systems, in a typical system, is that suppose A event happens and a trigger goes to the software that whatever happened is not good. So now it will give another trigger to system number B, which will give a negative response to cure this trigger. So now for example, the ice melting is taking place. Now because ice melting is taking place, the amount of evaporation will also enhance, the amount of precipitation will also enhance. Because precipitation is enhancing, the snowfall will enhance. Because snowfall has enhanced, the amount of ice will get accumulated and the albedo will increase. So therefore the amount of increasing temperature is actually compensated by negative feedback. But what happens during a positive feedback? This system gets confused and it is triggered so much so that now it starts producing the positive feedback only, which means you start melting ice so much that it exposes off the rocks. And the moment this rock is exposed, because the rocks have got very low albedo, they will start absorbing the heat and it will start eventually releasing of all the ice from this mountain. This is seen in the case of Himalayas and Alps as well due to global warming. So here a positive feedback is given, because of which whatever trigger has been given to B is actually augmenting and supporting what was happening in the system 1, that is melting of ice is accelerated. So fall in albedo and decrease in the lapse rate, both of them eventually increases the positive feedback mechanism, leading to more amplification of melting, more amplification of the warming event. Now, what are the consequences of Arctic amplification? First is the melting of ice, as it is seen in Greenland, which is the second largest ice shelf after Antarctica, which is also responsible for the second largest rise in the sea level due to a melting of glacier. So a lot of part of Greenland has already been melted. In fact, 6 billions a ton it has been releasing a day ever since the post-industrial times. Now, the thawing of the subsea permafrost is also one of the very important and one of the most disastrous implications of global warming. So what is a permafrost? This is a subsoil which is permanently frozen for at least 3 years. So the soil which is subjected to less than 0 degrees centigrade for more than 3 years is considered as a permafrost. It is mostly found in the torrid zones and the polar zones. Now, once the global warming happens, the melting of these permafrost starts occurring. Therefore, all the households that are built upon it, all the infrastructure that is built upon it, it also starts collapsing. But the worst thing is that this permafrost was also acting as a refrigerator for all the amount of organic material. This organic material, once the water gets off, it starts decaying. Decaying of this water material or decaying of this organic material will eventually lead to carbon dioxide and methane emissions. Now you know that this is the main culprit of global warming, because these are the major potent greenhouse gases. So because you are melting the permafrost, permafrost is also taking the revenge by increasing the amount of greenhouse gases, furthering up the global warming itself. And not only that, because it also had a huge resource or reservoir of virus and bacteria which were refrigerated before. Now because they are released, they also lead to outbreak of multiple disease. It was actually seen in Siberia in the year 2016 that the anthrax disease or this epidemic got spread. Why? Because of the release of permafrost. Next is the raging wildfires. Now, because global warming is happening, drying up of reservoirs takes place. Therefore, there is also drying up of the vegetation, and a lot of forest fires can be seen, especially in the polar regions of the Canada. And therefore, about 40% of the region of Canada, which is actually torrid in nature, is also seeing more than 25% rise in the annual wildfires in this decade. Next is severe flooding. Severe flooding has also been observed in the Mendenhall Glacier. Now, what has happened? That because the glacier is melting, it is at an unprecedented rate. It is not getting absorbed duly by the coastal cities, by the coastal towns, especially those who have been going through rapid acceleration or urbanization. So, severe flooding also takes place. Now, all of these factors actually impact the lives and livelihood, also determining the food security of that place. So, food insecurity is also one of the reasons. It is also highlighted by this article of Indian Express. The explain column suggests that because of the changes in the composition of the streams or the lakes or the rivers, especially in the polar regions, we can see the mixing of salt water in the fresh water. We can see the change in the temperature of these lakes or these streams or these water bodies. As a result, the health of the fishes are also getting impacted, which are the basic sources, the traditional cultural sources for the consumption of these people who are living in the polar region. So the size and the quality, both the quality and the quantity of the fishes are also going down, especially the tuna fish. So therefore, the food insecurity is also becoming prevalent in this region. Why? Because of Arctic amplification. So in this particular discussion, we have read about Arctic amplification, what are its causes and what are the consequences. And now we are going to read about G7, a multilateral grouping which comprises of those nations who were the first to get developed during the Industrial Revolution of 1970s. So here G7 bloc decided to block the diamonds from Russia with effect from March 1st, 2024. While it is not having any implication on India as such, but it gives us one important information that Russia, because G7 is going against it, is not a part of G7. So please be mindful of it, because this can be used as a very important elimination tactic by the examiner. Now, when you talk about G7, G7 is basically an informal grouping without any secretariat. So, if anybody asks you, where is the secretariat of G7, G20? There is no secretariat. There is no headquarter of these informal groupings. Now, these are a grouping of 7 industrialized democracies with the first world problems. So, basically, they formed or they came to have cooperations and discussions on mutual interests, which are definitely not talking about human development, poverty, elevation, hunger, etc., because that is the third world problem, as they say. But these discussion and mutual interest are on global economic governance, international security, and energy policy. As I've already told you, it doesn't have any secretariat, but in order to create legislation and discussions and cooperations, they carry up annual meetings. So, what is the origin story of G7? So, it all started from the 1973 oil crisis, which led to heavy global inflation or heavy global recession. Now, wary of that, an informal gathering of the finance ministers of the 5 countries excluding Italy and Canada. And by the way, which are these 7 countries? This is Germany, UK, France and Italy from Europe. From Asia, there's only one, that is Japan. And then from America, there is Canada and USA. Russia is not a part of G7. Now, except for Canada and Italy, the other five initially started or initiated this informal gathering, and the first ever summit happened in France. And in 1975, even Italy joined it. So in 1975, it became G6. In 1976, Canada also joined it. So now it became G7. Then in 1994, very important event happened that they also decided to join Russia. Russia, who was not doing very well with USA at that time because of the Cold War era, Still, Russia was made to join. But is Russia a part of it? No, because after its Crimean annexation, it was suspended from the membership of G7, and now since 2014, Russia is not a part. So we are left with Germany, UK, France, Canada, USA, Italy, and Japan. These are also, you can also remember it by understanding that which were the industrialized economies which got industrialized or which got developed as the first, as the pioneers across the world. Then if you add Russia into it, then it forms a G8 bloc, which is dysfunctional right now. And if you take into consideration all the important developing countries, including China and India, and also the developed countries like G7, then we get a conglomerate and informal grouping of G20. Now, interestingly, EU is also a part of G7, but it is a non-enumerated part. While it participates entirety, but still it is not given an enumeration or a counting. Therefore, we still call it G7 and not G8. Though EU, European Union, is completely functional member of G7 bloc, and it has been member since 1981. Then a very important topic, this is where we'll analyze the trade trends in India. We are reading about this because currently in this quarter it has been highlighted that the exports have shrunk and a steeper fall has been observed in the import, leading to shrinking fiscal deficit of the Indian economy, which is a good news. But what are the reasons to it? We have to analyze that as well. Okay. What are the observables from this report or from these findings? That first of all, the trade deficit has fell to almost 35%. Now, whenever you calculate the trade aspects of any country, you take into account two things. First of all, what is the export and what are the imports? Import is what you are purchasing, exports what you are giving out or what you are selling. Now, of course, exports are beneficial for any country because it gives us rupees, it gives us money in the economy. Imports are not very good for the economy. Why? Because heavy imports, we cannot really eliminate import in its entirety because we cannot have production of everything. We need to rely on somebody else as well. But heavy import is the problem over here because it costs the exchequer, because while you are importing something, it also releases out the rupee in the economy. Now, a healthy situation would be the one where exports and imports are compensated, and therefore it leads to a trade surplus. Trade surplus is a situation where exports are more than imports, and trade deficit is a situation where imports are more, cost on imports are more than exports. So now when you have understood about the trade surplus and deficit, can you also tell whether in the last 5 years India has seen a trade surplus or not? This is a very important question actually. Actually, in the quarter first of 2021, during the time of COVID, India actually saw a trade surplus. So yes, India has seen trade surplus in the last 5 years. And thereupon, we've been seeing trade deficit, and right now this trade deficit is also shrinking, which means we are getting more exports as compared to imports. Now, while it is highlighted that there is only a marginal rise in the export, the main factor which has led to decline of the trade deficit is our decline, heavy and steep decline in the amount of imports. That is, India is not purchasing a lot now. What is the reason behind it? First of all, because globally a wind is going on where the interest rates have been put high by their respective regulators. Why? Because globally inflation is going on, which means excess money in the economy, which has degraded the purchasing power capacity. And therefore, in order to regulate that, the amount of money that you can now take, the debt, the loan that you can, the credit that you can now take has become more difficult because of the rising interest rate. So because people do not have money across the globe, and because they are not able to get easy debts or easy credit, they are not asking for the products, and therefore the demand has gone down. So the first reason is demand has gone down due to rising inflation and due to fall of the purchasing power capacity of the people. Then there is also increased oil prices. Increased oil prices has also led to rise in the cost of oil, decrease in its production, and also somewhere decrease in its demand. But this is also one of the reasons India, being one of the most dependent countries on the oil import, has also seen somewhat rise in the imports, or the amount of import that we are taking because of the rise in oil prices. But then it got compensated by compensating it with the demand. Demand got lessened up. So here, Ukraine and West Asian crisis, for example, the Israel-Gaza crisis, conflicts are responsible for cutting down the oil production across the world, and therefore we could not purchase the oil that we want. Because we could not purchase the oil, we are not paying duly for it, therefore also our trade deficit is getting moderated. Finally, in the previous quarter, it is also observed that the agriculture related export have also came down or declined by 11% in the previous quarter. Why? Because of the government policy, which has led to bans and restrictions in the exported products, especially export of food security related products like rice, wheat, etc. from India. So these are some of the reasons which have led to rise in the deficit, or which have led to the moderation of the deficit. Now let's talk about the import and export basket of India, to whom we are selling the most and from whom we are purchasing the most. Now you must remember this, that though US is a much larger economy than us, but then US finds it more cheap to procure things from India, a developing country like India. So therefore, it is the developed countries of the world which are the primary source or primary destinations of India's export item. So the largest export destination is USA, then there is UAE, then there is Singapore, then there is China, Hong Kong, Saudi Arabia, Netherlands, so on and so forth. You also need to be updated with the revised charts of such data, because they keep updating themselves. But the most important thing is to have your concepts clear, that it is not the developing countries like China from which we are to whom we are exporting, but rather the developed countries. Now our export, or the best exported items from India, the largest share is of the processed petroleum product. Please remember, we procure crude petroleum, but then we processed it in our refineries, and then we are also the largest sellers of it. Then we sell processed gems and jewelry. Now please understand, while we purchase the raw minerals, the raw gems and gold and silver like metals, we process them in the form of jewelry, and then we are also second at its export as well. Then pharma products, transport, machinery, etc. You can have a look in this table via your handout PDF that is available in the description box. Now let's talk about from whom India is purchasing. India is not purchasing from the developed economies where prices are too high, rather from the developing countries. First and foremost from China, then UAE, then Saudi Arabia, then USA. Okay. And what are the top import items you've already seen, and you can have a more closer look in the PDF. So this was all about today's discussion. I hope you have liked it. Thank you so much and have a nice day.